Hey, everybody, a special note from your host. This was originally supposed to be 5 minutes long, but when you're chatting with Stephen Cooper, the content is just so good, so we thought you'd like to hear it. Welcome to the State of the Line podcast. I'm your host, Cristine Pike, and today we have a very special episode of the podcast. We like to call it 5 Questions in 5 Minutes. Our expert today is Stephen Cooper, senior economist, and also fresh off the Annual Insights Symposium. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you for having me. Great to be back.
Glad to have you as well. Do you think we can do this in 5 minutes?
No, but
Okay.
We're going to try.
Let's do it. Let's start with the labor market. In your AIS presentation, you shared that 2025 was the slowest year of job growth outside of a recession, probably in more than 2 decades. Is that right?
That is. You have to go back to the early 2000s for the last time we had job growth that slow.
Okay. And so if you had to summarize the labor market from the last 6 months, one sentence, what would you say?
One sentence. I'll do even better. I'll give you one word.
Ooh.
Better. So through the first 6 months of this year, we've seen some trends starting to shift in the labor market. So it was a little early to get excited about things at AIS, but now we've gotten a little bit more data in and we're starting to see some acceleration in the pace of job growth in the labor market. So, we talked about 2025 and the labor market added, about 10,000 jobs per month on average. That compares to prior to the pandemic, 190,000 jobs per month. And now in early 2026, we're seeing that average back around 100,000 from basically zero that we experienced in 2025. Even better, we're seeing job breadth starting to widen out. So 2025 was just a one industry story. Healthcare was the predominant industry that was leading job growth. And now we're starting to see job growth in some other industries as well.
How does that impact workers' compensation?
Yeah, so the workers' compensation impacts here are twofold. So one, I'll get into the direct impact, which is on the premium equation. So obviously, if we're thinking about jobs not being added in 2025, you may be led to believe, well, then premium is probably going to be impacted because we're not seeing that growth in the labor market that we normally see. But 2025 was a bit of a unique situation where even though we didn't add very much from the employment perspective, wages continued to grow strongly. So overall payroll, which is the combination of employment and wages, still grew strongly in 2025 from 2024. Now in 2026 that we've seen employment growth starting to come back now, we still have strong wage growth as well. The combination of those two factors is leading to payroll growth that's starting to accelerate a little bit in 2026 so far from where we were in 2025. And so that could be a benefit to workers' compensation. Now, the second impact that I want to talk about is a little bit more of an indirect impact, and that is on new hires. So workers with less than 12 months tenure on the job is a demographic cohort that we follow very closely because they typically have higher claim frequency than more tenured workers. So in 2025, when we saw very little employment growth overall, it could have been impacting frequency from fewer of these injuries of inexperience, as we call them. Now in 2026, with hiring starting to accelerate again, most notably in industries like construction and manufacturing, we may start to see some of these short tenured workers become injured again, these injuries of inexperience that we talked about. So we're going to have to watch that closely as we see how frequency trends develop for the year.
So let's continue on that theme of the labor market and these changing trends. There was little job growth in 2025 and now improving job growth in 2026. What do you attribute this change in trend to, and how durable do we think it will be?
Yeah, the modest hiring trend in 2025 is interesting because it did last for most of the year. And so the question was this a new persistent trend, or was this just a temporary phenomenon? And now that we've seen these trends evolving in early 2026, it may be the case that it was just a temporary phenomenon. If you recall back to 2025, there were a couple of significant events in the economy that increased uncertainty. So we had changes in immigration policy and we had changes in trade policy, and both of them could be having temporary effects on hiring overall for the year. Now that some of those impacts are behind us, we have more known about what the environment that businesses are going to be operating under. That could be leading to the little bit of rebound that we're starting to see. Additionally, the economy overall remaining resilient probably helped as well. Questions were abound in 2025 as to whether a recession was on the horizon or a deeper slowdown in the economy. And with activity levels holding up relatively well, we had about 2% growth in the overall economy for the full year. That's probably given some confidence to businesses that, the economy is still on strong footing, and that may be helping the job rebound as well.
Great. Let's shift gears a little bit to the quarterly economics briefing, which recently came out and which I know our stakeholders love to read about. And this one, you talked about AI, potential impact to the labor force. I noticed that you added a quote from Ethan Mollick from our AIS keynote. What would be one misconception that you're seeing about AI and the labor market currently? Tell us about that.
Yeah, this is such a great topic right now for the time because there's so many questions about, not just from workers' compensation stakeholders, but I think just from everyday people, is what is the impact of AI going to be on jobs? And I'll start with that quote from Ethan, who did just speak at our Annual Insights Symposium. And the big takeaway from that is that, nobody really knows anything right now. We're all just kind of making it up as we go. And that's a perfect encapsulation as we're trying to figure out what the actual impacts to employment are, both here in the short run, as well as what they're going to be in the long run. So in that QEB, we kind of broke things down into two steps. One, a conceptual framework for how we as economists look at technological innovation more broadly, so not just AI, and then also what we're seeing now in the data more recently, specifically around AI. So on that first part, when we're thinking about how technology in general impacts jobs, we want to think about the tasks, not the jobs themselves. The whole purpose of technology over the course of history has typically been to make tasks that are either dangerous or inefficient easier to be done, or actually even to eliminate those tasks so humans don't need to do them anymore. This has been one of these longer term contributors to the workplace safety improvements that we've seen over time. And another impact that we need to think about is the dimensionality of a job. So dimensionality is a word that we as economists use to define how many different tasks a job has. Jobs at their most basic are just a bundle of tasks, a collection of tasks that people do over the course of their day. And so some jobs have low dimensionality where there's a limited or a small number of tasks that are being done under that job. And these jobs may be more exposed to artificial intelligence if those tasks are able to be eliminated or able to be drastically reduced by this technology. Those jobs may need to evolve into seeing those workers do other tasks, or they may be eliminated altogether. If we think about back through history, switchboard operators and pin boys at the bowling alley, there are a number of jobs that used to exist that just don't exist anymore. The labor market has evolved over the last, 150 to 200 years. But then we have high dimensionality jobs, and this is where things get a little bit more interesting. So if you have a job that has a high number of tasks, and some of those tasks are exposed to artificial intelligence in a way that it can make the worker more productive, instead of the worker having to spend time and energy on some of these tasks that may be inefficient or may be strenuous, the worker is then able to either put more effort into the other tasks, increasing the quality of the product, or that frees up their time to then go add additional tasks that they can do as well. So there's a concept in economics from the turn of the century called Jevons paradox. It's around the steam engine, and the invention of the steam engine was supposed to drastically reduce the amount of coal that was being used in economies. Because of the efficiencies of the steam engine, though, what actually happened is that coal use increased because the steam engine allowed more work to be done in so many different areas that we actually saw even more coal being used because of the productivity gains that we saw. Now, this isn't a perfect corollary, but it is a nice one when we think about AI, because if productivity increases from AI and some of these high dimensionality jobs are able to permeate, we may see more employment actually instead of less employment, as that productivity is going to allow the economy to expand even more. So it's a very interesting spot that we're in right now. It's still probably a little bit too early to draw full conclusions as to what's going on, but very interesting to watch. Now, I do just want to add the last takeaway from that paper is what we're seeing so far here in 2026. So by looking at AI adoption across industries and then contrasting that with employment changes that we've seen across those industries, we are starting to see a little bit of a weak negative correlation that is forming. So jobs like information services and financial services that are more exposed to AI right now. They have higher levels of AI adoption. They've seen more struggles in the employment side. So either growing more slowly or actually continuing to see outright declines in employment so far this year. Whereas sectors that are less exposed, like construction, manufacturing, trade, and transportation, they're seeing stronger levels of employment growth with those lower exposure levels that we're seeing overall. Now, there is a couple of outliers that I do want to call out, because in professional, scientific, and technical services, as well as in healthcare, these are two sectors where we've seen higher levels of AI adoption, but we've also seen stronger employment growth over this time. So again, early to say, but this could be an example of these higher dimensionality jobs where we're seeing productivity gains coming in, leading to actually more employment than less.
If that doesn't drive our listeners to check out the QEB, I don't know what will. We'll make sure to include that in the show notes. So at AIS, Stephen, we had something called Submit Your Questions for a chance to be featured on the podcast. So we did receive a question from one of our audience members. And the question is, can tariff refunds add to inflation? How are you thinking about inflation risks more broadly right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that we spoke about at AIS was these tariff refunds that are coming out. So for anybody who hasn't been paying attention as closely to the happenings of the Supreme Court, there was a ruling in which the IEEPA tariffs from the administration were exceeding in presidential authority, and any tariffs collected under that would then need to be refunded back. And the number is, anywhere from $150 to $170 billion is the estimate of how many refunds would be going back out to businesses and households that paid these tariffs. And so that's quite a large stimulus coming in from the economy. And so the very obvious question here, the one that was asked, is would that contribute to inflation? And it's an interesting dynamic to think about, because the answer could be, well, yes or no, as with most questions in the economy. And so we need to think about this from a couple of dimensions. So first and foremost, tariff refunds to individuals very likely could cause inflation, because again, you're putting more money back in their pockets, and that increases the ability for them to purchase goods and services with that additional income that has come in. But the predominant amount of the tariff refunds is going to be going back to businesses instead of individuals. It's going to be those large retailers out there that have been importing goods and then paying those tariffs. So with the large amount of these refunds that are going to be going back to businesses rather than consumers, that has a little bit more of an interesting implication for inflation. One of the things that we can learn about corporate stimulus most recently from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that we passed back in 2018 timeframe was what happened to those tax dollars that were returned to companies. And what we saw was that a portion of them were paid out to workers in higher wages, and that could be inflationary. So if we do see these tax refunds back to businesses leading to either more employment, more hiring, or higher wages paid out to workers, that could definitely be a factor that could be pushing inflation higher. But one of the other things that we saw was that this refund to businesses allowed for more competition. So because costs were then lowered for businesses, we saw that they passed on lower prices in some highly competitive industries onto consumers. And so that aspect of things could actually lead to lower inflation if we see a large amount of these tax dollars refunded, competed away from businesses overall. So that's really the encapsulation of why that's a difficult question to answer and why it could actually fall both ways. We right now, given the information that we have and what we're seeing from other trends going on in inflation, don't think we're going to see a material impact in the overall numbers from this phenomenon happening. Inflation right now is mostly being driven by energy prices, first up and then now heading back lower. And so that's been the predominant driver of inflation right now for the economy overall, and we're expecting a limited impact from the tariff refunds.
And one thing is for certain, you and your team will be closely following that. Do I have that right?
Yes, we are always closely following every evolution that's going on in the economy, and we'll keep you, the industry, apprised of the most important facets and how things are changing.
Stephen, thank you. That has been 5 questions, and I think maybe a little bit more than 5 minutes.
Slightly more, but for those of you in the audience that know me, you should have expected it.
Thanks for joining us today, Stephen.
Thank you for having me. This has been great.
If you want to reach out to Stephen or even want to request a topic that we cover on the next podcast, reach out to insights@ncci.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
This podcast is the copyrighted material of the National Council on Compensation Insurance, 2026. All rights reserved.